let us talk to Dinesh D'Souza. We recorded this just a little earlier, but we have all the things to talk about. Dinesh has a new book out called The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left, which is an interesting thing to have come out just as everybody is accusing the right of being the Nazis. So I don't know if his timing was great or terrible, but we'll find out. Here is Dinesh D'Souza. All right, in our continuing efforts to give ex-cons a chance to rehabilitate themselves, we've invited Dinesh D'Souza on fresh from your stint in the Slammer. I have to tell you this. Two things. One is you are the only person whose book I ever did as an audiobook that wasn't mine. And I did that out of respect for you for standing up to an Obama administration that was literally willing to imprison you for what you said. But the other thing I want to say to you, and I'm talking, of course, about these campaign contributions, and you were not put in prison, but you were put in this, what would you call it, a halfway house, basically.
8 months of overnight confinement with a fairly varied group of hoodlums.
The night I heard about this, I was at a large party with some of the most prominent conservatives in the country, and was shocked to hear them sort of saying, well, maybe Dinesh shouldn't have made this. It was a minor error in contributions against a law that shouldn't be in place anyway. I mean, I just thought it was a political takedown.
Well, both things are true. I was naive in the first, not to be familiar enough with the campaign laws. Number two, not to realize that after making a movie about Obama, and given what a thin-skinned narcissist he is, and I knew that, not to realize there'd be a big target on my back. But my message to all these conservatives who reflexively say, we got to follow the law, is just wait till the federal government puts you in their sights, assigns 10 FBI agents to look at your bank records and your tax returns. We live in an era where if they want to get you, they can.
That's right. That is
and justice isn't just a matter of did you do it. It's a matter of did other people who did it get the same penalty?
Right.
Was the punishment proportionate to the crime? Now, in my case, no American has been prosecuted, let alone convicted or locked up for doing what I did. Typically, in these campaign finance cases, they only go after you if there's corruption, by which I mean a quid pro quo.
Right.
I'll give you the money. I want you to pass a law that says this, so I want an appointment to a judicial position if you get elected. None of this was even applicable in my case.
Right. Well, it's a badge of honor as far as I'm concerned. But I'm glad to see that you're trying to build bridges with the left now with your new book, The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left.
I think the subtitle alone reveals my great reputation for moderation.
Endear yourself with the left. All right, now this is a big thesis, especially with some of the stuff that's been going on in the news recently. You are saying that it is the Democrat Party that has actual links to the left, or just philosophical links, or what?
Yeah, I started the book knowing that fascism and Nazism were on the left, right. That Mussolini was a Marxist, in fact, the most famous Marxist in Italy. I knew that when Mussolini did his march on Rome, Lenin sent a telegram of congratulations, basically saying, fellow revolutionary on the left, congratulations. Right. I knew, of course, that Hitler had the National Socialist Party. So I knew that there was a kind of scam that had occurred after the war, World War II, in which the progressives had somehow cunningly moved fascism from the left-wing column to the right-wing column. So that's what I started out as my hypothesis. Now, what I didn't know is that there's a whole secret history between the progressives and the Democrats on the one hand, and the fascists and the Nazis on the other. I had thought that there would be similarities. So, for example, I was struck, Andrew, by the fact that here in America in the 20s, we had the Ku Klux Klan.
Right.
The Nazis had the brown shirts. Now, check out these two organizations. Both are into costumes, right? Both are into racial terrorism. Both are paramilitary organizations. Both pick on a kind of minority, blacks, Jews. Both are extensions of a party, the Klan of the Democratic Party, the Nazis of the Nazi Party. So I was looking for analogies, but what I didn't realize is they're actually in bed together, that the Nazis are heavily drawing on ideas from the American progressives and from the Democrats.
Really?
Yes, I'll give you one example. Okay. Here are the Nazis in 1935. These are the senior department heads of the Nazi Party meeting to draft the Nuremberg laws. And they have a stenographer present because they decide it's a historic occasion. We are creating the world's first racist state. one of the Nazis, a guy named Krieger, who had studied in America, stands up and spoils the party by saying, sorry guys, you can't create the world's first racist state. The Democrats in America, in the South, have done it. He goes, all the stuff that we want to do, outlaw intermarriage between Jews and Germans, confiscate Jewish property, segregate the Jews into ghettos, they've beaten us to the punch. All we need to do is to take their laws, in effect, now I'm paraphrasing, cross out the word black, write in the word Jew, and we're home free. So the Nazis then reconvene with all these laws in front of them. And the Nuremberg laws are drafted based upon, in a sense, a substitution of words from existing democratic laws. Remember, every segregation law in the South was passed by a democratic legislature, signed by a democratic governor. There are no exceptions to that rule.
Now, obviously, the Democrats are always saying that Nixon's Southern strategy flipped the script. So from that point on, yes, they will admit, they like to bury it, but they will admit that they were connected to slavery. But basically, they say the modern Democratic Party is not that party whatsoever, and has completely severed that. And now all those guys are Republicans.
Now, that big switch narrative is false. There is a grain of truth in what the Democrats are saying. The grain of truth is this: the Democrats have, in a sense, done a transfer of ethnic nationalism. And what I mean by this is that they used to be the party of white nationalism. This is, in fact, how they held the South. Right. They used racism as a sort of way of telling every poor white loser that by joining our party, you get to be above every black guy, no matter how rich or well educated. So they created this racial totem pole with whites at the top. Now they have an inverted totem pole. In other words, now they support every other type of ethnic nationalism except the white. And in fact, they encourage every other ethnic group to affirm its identity, racial solidarity, black pride, Hispanic pride, and then they mobilize these ethnic nationalisms against the white. So the reason I think these white nationalists are sort of politically homeless, they belong in the Democratic Party. The Democrats invented white nationalism. But now when they go to the multicultural picnic, not only are they not wanted, they're Satan. So Trump's nationalism, which is not a white nationalism, but an American nationalism, is a better alternative for them than the old Democratic Party, which was their natural home.
So let's talk about Trump for a while, because obviously there's been all this stuff in the news and this alt-right people, and they deeply, it deeply offends me to have these guys in my house and they're calling themselves right-wingers, putting themselves in the Conservative Party. But we have to admit, they vote for the same candidate we voted for. What's the connection? Yeah,
so that's my point, is if you're a white nationalist today, and most of these guys, I mean, let's remember, first of all, what we're talking about. This is a residual ragtag group compared to what it used to be. Take the Klan, right? The Klan today has maybe 1,000 members. The Klan can't have a demonstration anywhere in the country without 4 times as many protesters encircling them. And so this is not the old Klan. When the Klan had real power, this is in the 20s, it had 3 to 5 million members. In the mid-20s, 50,000 Klansmen in hoods marched on Fifth Avenue in New York City. Where were they going? The Democratic National Convention. That's where they were headed. So the Klan was, and Eric Foner says this, the progressive historian, the domestic terrorist arm of the Democratic Party. And this is its actual history. So this is why I think things like Charlottesville are so convenient for the left, because they feed the media narrative that somehow the KKK is on the right. But what we have to account for is why these dudes today, ragtag though they may be, why do they think they're on our side? Why are they for Trump? I think it's for a bunch of reasons. One, it is that Trump's American nationalism has a place for everyone. It's basically saying America is one country. Now remember, Trump doesn't make a racial distinction. When Trump distinguishes immigrants, it's the legal versus the illegal. Right? Now remember, most legal immigrants today are not white. They're not the Irish, they're not the Italians, the Jews. They're Pakistanis and West Indians and Koreans. And Trump has never said, hey, I don't like the browning of America. I want to make sure we get more immigrants from Australia and fewer from, say, India. Trump has said, I want immigrants who speak English, but of course, as you know, the Indians speak English. So that is not a racial line at all. The other thing about Trump is an America First guy and a jobs guy. And in an era where the blue-collar white working class has been pretty hard hit, at a time when the economy as a whole has done well for many others, this promise of jobs may be a non-racial motive for many of these guys to like Trump.
Okay. Now, what about the idea? I mean, I've always said that I just don't think Trump is a racist. He just does not have that stink on him at all, and it's not something that he's first of all, he's surrounded by Jews. I mean, everybody around him is a Jew, so I don't know what these Nazis are talking about when they're supporting him. But the charge against him is that he has been mealy-mouthed, I guess would be the word to use, that he hasn't come out and condemned them. They hit him after Charlottesville, that his first statement talked about the hate on all sides. Fair or not fair?
Well, I stopped by the White House. I signed a book to Trump. Trump, I don't think, knows the ideology of this. He is an instinctive guy.
Right.
But I think instinctively he knows that there's a scam underway. Uh-huh. And the scam underway is to take these 12 white supremacists and basically stick them on the Republican Party. Andrew, I've been speaking at GOP events since 1991 when my first book, Illiberal Education, came out. My wife asked me just today, she said to me, Dinesh, have you at any of these events ever seen a Nazi or a Klansman or a skinhead? And I said, I never have. This is actually just not who our team is. But the left is trying to make it so. And so when they say to Trump, you must single out and condemn the white nationalists, obviously implying you must not at the same time include. There's a lot of violence in American politics right now. After Charlottesville, there are riots in Seattle, and the Antifa guys are battling the cops, and they were at Trump's own rallies. So Trump knows intuitively that this violence is not a one-sided phenomenon. Mm-hmm. In fact, it resembles sort of the early days of the black shirts in the 20s, when the Mussolini's guys were fighting their political opponents. Hitler would talk in the 30s about how he'd speak in a German beer hall, and the communists and the Nazis exchanging blows while he's giving his talk. I mean, we haven't seen that in American politics, at least not in my adult lifetime. I'm a little worried we're seeing the hints of it now. We're not where Nazism was, of course, but it's that early whiff of it that worries me.
So you're saying with Trump that basically he knows he's being scammed. He hasn't really quite sat down and thought about it. He is, as you say, an instinctive guy. He basically realizes that there's violence on both sides, and when he comes out and says that, he feels that he's covered this. You don't support, for instance, the idea that Steve Bannon is in his side office cooking up some white plan for a white America.
Here's the thing. All this, I think that this term alt-right is very amorphous.
Yes,
I think when it started out, the origin of the term was that there is a group that is on the right, that belongs in the Republican Party, but has been completely, you may say, excommunicated. Right. And these are the economic nationalists. Bannon has said repeatedly, I'm not a racial nationalist, I'm an economic nationalist.
He has said that.
Yeah. And he doesn't hesitate to say things like, I would prefer an American worker over a foreign worker because he's one of us.
Right.
So that is nationalism, but it's not racial nationalism, because it would benefit, for example, the African American over, let's say, the illegal coming over from Mexico. And that's Bannon. Now, interestingly, as I dug into this book, I found that, take a guy like George Soros. Now, Soros is sort of the kingmaker on the left. Right. He funds the Antifa groups, Refuse Fascism. He purports to be a champion of the Open Society, Karl Popper, and so on. Now, just in researching Soros, I find this interview he did some years ago with Steve Kroft of CBS News.
Oh, yes, I remember.
Steve Kroft says to Soros, is it not a fact that when in your native Hungary, when you were in your teens, you and a bunch of guys were going through Jewish neighborhoods, basically confiscating Jewish property and turning it over to the Nazi-owned regime in Hungary? Soros goes, yes, it's true. And then I think the key question, Steve Kroft says, well, okay, you were a teenager then, but you're not a teenager now. Looking back on this, do you feel a sense of regret, remorse? And Soros basically says, absolutely not. Why would I? He says, that stuff was happening anyway. I didn't make it happen. I merely took advantage of it, kind of the way in markets I take advantage of market opportunities. Now, think about this. If this had been the actual history of any Trump appointee, right? He was actually a collection boy for Hitler in his youth and doesn't regret it now.
Right.
It would be scandalous. So the leftists sort of constructed this thing in which they chase people down for obscure, dubious violations, whereas the flagrant violations on their own side are ignored.
We're talking about this book, The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left by Dinesh D'Souza. Laying aside for a minute the racial aspect of it, the identity politics aspect of it, are there any other connections between Nazi policy as it was at the peak of the Nazis and Democrat politics today?
Well, here's the key thing. The Nazis have taken the socialism out of National Socialism.
Okay.
Right? The core meaning of fascism is the centralized state. Mussolini says everything in the state and nothing outside the state. Right. And what Mussolini means is that the state is like an organism. Each individual is a cell within it. Your life, your rights are meaningless except to the degree that you serve the state. Right. Now, my point is, does this more resemble the Republican Party or the Democratic Party? If you look at the economics of the Democratic Party now, we're not talking about the 30s, we're talking about now. To me, they're classically fascist. And what I mean by that is, they're not Marxian socialists. Socialist governments take over industries, right? Nationalization. The Indian government nationalized in the 40s and 50s. They would run the energy sector. They would own the banking industry. The government would. Now, under Obama, we have private hospitals. We have private health insurance, but the government directs it. So it's state-directed capitalism. And we saw that with the banks, with the investment companies, with the energy sector. So this notion of state-directed capitalism is classic. That's the classic economic definition of fascism.
Right, right. Okay, fair enough. And you mentioned Planned Parenthood, which is one of my favorite targets. I mean, they really have developed an idea of the human being that does send a chill up my spine, you know, when you think of the Nazis.
Now, Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was a champion of forced sterilization.
Yes.
And when the Nazis adopted the forced sterilization law of 1933, Margaret Sanger went around giving speeches basically praising the Nazi program, saying it's more...
Specifically,
she named it. Yeah. She said, basically what she said is the Germans are getting ahead of us. She goes, we are falling behind, and we need to go where they're going. Now, what Margaret Sanger did not do, but other progressives, there was a guy named Paul Popenoe in California, a progressive eugenicist, he talked about lethal chambers. He goes, it's not just a matter of preventing people from being born. We've got the sick, the disabled, the worthless people in our society. We have to kill them. And we can't kill them one by one. There are too many of them. We need a system to do it. The point I'm trying to make is that the Nazi eugenicists in the early 30s got the idea of lethal chambers with carbon monoxide gas from the United States. The original concentration gas chambers were for the sick, the disabled, what they call imbeciles. That was later expanded into the final solution. So there's a very ugly history here. It's all in the historical record, but a lot of it's not in the textbooks because the progressives coming to power after the war decided to leave it out.
Yeah, that's interesting when they're taking down statues of Robert E. Lee. I always want to say to them, you know, 50 years from now, they're going to be taking down statues of people who supported abortion because they're going to say this was a Holocaust and you shouldn't have a statue or an airport named after a guy who supported this. Let me finish up talking a little bit about Obama. As one of his most effective critics, so effective that he actually came after you. What do you feel is his legacy? I mean, is Trump does seem to be dismantling a lot of it, and yet healthcare still in place, Obamacare still in place. What do you feel is the result of the 8 years of Obama?
Well, to me, I think Obamacare will be substantially remade, if not unmade. The Republicans, I think, just weren't ready for it. They didn't think Trump would win.
I know, they were surprised.
So now they're suddenly scrambling and saying, oh, well, we actually get to do this. And so they're knitting together the way to do it. I think Obama, what's very bad about Obama is he brought a gangsterism to American politics that wasn't there before. For example, I don't think that Jimmy Carter would have dreamed of trying to imprison his political opponents. But with Obama, we saw for the first time the mobilization of the organs of the state, the IRS, the FBI. My case is only one. The Tea Party guys they were going after, they would try to track down investors in our films so they could audit their taxes. I mean, this kind of political prosecution, very dangerous stuff. In fact, it's fascism of a much scarier kind than what happened in Charlottesville or the Antifa guys. Those guys are at least outside on the street. I'm much more worried about studio bosses that will throw you out of the film industry if you confess to being a conservative, or deans who control billion-dollar endowments who can enforce what the Nazis called Gleichschaltung, in other words, forced cooperation across whole swaths of American culture. That's much more dangerous, and Obama is part of that, creating that atmosphere of retribution and intolerance that we now see in our culture.
He legitimized, there's no question. The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left by Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh, thanks very much for coming on. It's always great to see you.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.